Hi everybody, it's Patrick from 8-Bit Doodads. Today we're going to be doing a follow-up video to my DOScember Part 1, which came out in December. Um, since this is now January, we'll call this our DOStastic series.
Say, kids, what time is it?
It's 8-Bit Doodads time!
If you watched the Part 1, you saw we went through these various old machines I had just to see where they stand, did they boot, etc. And my goal was to restore them along with some other replacing a motherboard to give us an old x86 motherboard, in that case a 386. But I thought I'd back up and talk about what projects I actually had entailed and why I'm going through this. And these relate to some of my other series, so this work needed to be done to help fill in those. One of those projects was to get this card working, which is a PC AppleTalk card to interconnect an old PC to our AppleTalk network, allowing it to exchange files with older Macs and Apple IIs and to share printers. And the reason these become important is because this card is only available in an ISA slot. So I needed a machine that had ISA slots. And that's why I've kept every one of these. They have at least one ISA slot. So that's important. Another project that I have, or a networking series, is on Corvus. And if you watch that, you saw us linking multiple Apple IIs up to a Corvus OmniNet network with, in that case, talking to an OmniDrive disk server. And if you look up in the corner there, you'll actually see those are my 4 Corvus drives, 2 of which I've gotten working in that series. This would allow us to add PC support to the Corvus OmniDrive, or alternatively, I have found some software which will allow you to turn a PC into a Corvus OmniDrive to be shared by other PCs. So instead of having to buy one of those dedicated disk units, you could actually turn a PC into it. And that would be interesting to see that work. And in fact, the documentation I have suggests that if you get that working and sharing with PCs and they give you the software for doing that, you could actually install the AppleTalk software, not AppleTalk, I'm sorry, the Apple II OmniDrive software onto that, and PC becomes the host instead of that dedicated machine. So I'll be interested in doing that. So that was 2 of the projects that was driving this. Another one was that there's an original IBM PC over there. I have the monitor, and I think we showed that working. Unfortunately, its hard drive doesn't work, and I don't have an ISA version of a hard drive emulator for that machine. So getting that booted off of some medium could be done using this OmniDrive. That could be a slave to that. And also restoring other parts of that particular machine. We worked on its memory card, and we do have a working keyboard for it. Something to note on, since we're talking about, I just mentioned keyboards, one of the things I've come across is how you have to source different keyboards for each of these machines. In the case of the PC, you need to find a keyboard that has that PCAT switch and plug it in. And if you then move that keyboard to one of these other machines that has the old DIN 5, you need to make sure you set it back, because the machine will think a keyboard's plugged in, but nothing, you type on it, nothing goes on. The last note I want to make about keyboards is I got this PS2 keyboard, which is plugged into the machine right here, and it's driving me crazy. I have to go find another PS2 keyboard. The reason being is, if any of you want to look closely, whoops, see if it focuses in, there's no black backslash key on this keyboard. It has a forward slash. And as you know, if you're just working with PC DOS, you have to use the backslash key. I can't imagine why anyone invented this keyboard. I later learned you can hold the Alt key and type 92, and that will give you the backslash character when you need it. But it's very annoying to use. Okay, as I said, I wanted to. One of my projects was getting this Corvus board to work. I have the software images for this in IMD format, and I've been going crazy trying to get those put onto actual floppy disks, which we're going to talk about the software that I have here. It seems that those commands, they want to be run on a PC. They don't like running on a modern Windows machine. Windows is giving me alerts saying, this is incompatible software, you can't run this command, etc. So the tools that I have need to be on here. So that means I need to get one of these machines working and working with DOS. I believe we did a thing with this machine in that DOS video where I have a single, not that one. In fact, I may not have the disk around here. I had a DOS 3.3, IBM DOS 3.3 disk, and it was the only one I had that was booting. And I was able to set up this machine, format the hard drive, etc., or at least test that the floppy was working. The problem with DOS is it only allows you for a 32 meg drive C, because DOS 3.3 didn't know about FAT32, it was only FAT16. And you can use more of the disk space and make a drive D, a drive E, a drive F, etc., but you can't have one large space. It turns out that, and I think it's since MS-DOS 6, but definitely with DOS 7, they would support FAT32 and creating a larger drive. So I happen to go through all the stuff I have, and I, lo and behold, found a PC DOS 7, actually DOS 2000 they called it. It was PC DOS with the Y2K fixes, CD. And I said, that's great. Put it into my PC. There are disk images there, and there's even utilities to make your stack of floppies for PC DOS to put on a machine. Again, this era software, Windows doesn't want to run the setup utilities or the make disk utilities on a Windows command line. You have to be in DOS to do it. There's a gotcha. Why don't we have DVD and CD drives in the machines? Why don't we just put this in and boot the CD? This disk is non-bootable. And I think it was because back in the day, they didn't have, bootable. No one was booting off of CD-ROMs. They were playing music, or they were, copying programs, games that were coming on them, but you didn't boot the disk. So, and you could make a disk non-bootable if you chose, and that was the case. So again, I needed to get this onto one of these machines. Well, I needed to get a machine running with a CD drive and put the disk in, and then run the utility on this machine to make the images. That was the second thing I learned. It turns out that PC-DOS, wrong disk. These are my PC-DOS disks. It turns out, while this has some command programs for dealing with CD-ROMs, it does not have the drivers for dealing with your CD-ROM. That usually came with the disk drive back in the day. There is a Site 86 x86 box or something. I'll put a link in the description that has some really cool tools, and it has an emulator for running DOS on a machine. They have lots of great links, and one of them is a single disk image that has the CD drivers, installation program, setup, and everything. So once I, found a set of MS-DOS 622, I put that in the machine, got the hard drive running, added the CD-ROM drivers to it, and was then able to make my images. So that's where we are with this machine, or I'm sorry, that's where we were with this machine. Once I got that up and running, as I was looking around for other things, I came across an original Windows 98 with activation code, um, and I decided to put that on this machine because it still has DOS underneath it and will allow me to run DOS commands in the future if I come across it and do the imaging I need for the smorgasbord. But it also gives me a Windows interface, and the biggest thing is Windows 98 will let you look at a bigger hard drive partition. So it wasn't, I think with PC DOS, it was allowing me to get to about 500 megs. With Windows 98, I could get to 8 gigs, which brings me across the next challenge I had. I actually have some IDE hard drives. I have a stack of them. Here's a 40, here's a 120. I tried to put that in this machine I was trying just the 40 to use up that much space. And it turns out if you have an old enough machine, and this has an AMI, this is a Micron PC with an AMI BIOS, it won't see hard drives larger than 8 gig. It actually will see the hard drive, but it can't get to the additional space. And you have to do something. You either have to reflash the BIOS, or you have to have something they call an overlay BIOS, something that gets put on the boot sector of the hard drive that loads a more current BIOS or into memory, that tells it how it can address the larger drive. In some ways, that's in modern PCs, we have the EFI, and you can load things into the EFI that allow it to address unique hardware, etc. on boot, so the system can boot up from those machines. I didn't go down that path. In fact, what I did was I happened to find an 8 gig hard drive and put it in there because for Windows 98 and what I want to use this machine for, that was fine. This machine does have one ISA slot, so I can use it in either one of these projects on here. The other machines actually have more, and I'm going to get into those now. This particular machine is a Pentium 2. It has, I think, 384 megs of memory, and that's why I chose Windows 98. My ultimate goal was to have these machines running either DOS, Win311, a Windows 95, maybe a 98, etc. I don't need them to run XP because that can be run on a newer machine. There's one special machine, though, and that's this tower. In the last series, I showed a 386 motherboard that has standard ISA slots. And I think I mentioned I discovered the power supply in that tower would work for that motherboard. So I was going to pull the power supply out and save it for that motherboard project and put it into a different case. And just put a standard power supply in it because the motherboard that was in there had both the ATX 20-pin, 24-pin connector as well as that, I think it's 15 or 16-pin old PC AT style power connector, which is what I needed for the motherboard. It turns out the power supply that's in this machine is directly connected to this switch. It's all one piece. So taking the power supply out of the machine was a non-starter. So what I did instead was I swapped the motherboard. So this machine now has the 386 motherboard with, I believe, 4 megs of memory, and that was a good thing. The next thing I needed to do was find video for it, and I think I mentioned I got a card from local collector here, Act Computers, and I put it in. One of the things I noticed, there was bars coming down the screen, and I was like, and it wasn't the monitor because I was using it with different things, and I didn't know if that was what the card was supposed to look for, and more likely, it had some bad RAM on it, and so it was giving me those stripes. And I said, okay, I'll have to find another card for it. And I went looking for an AGP card for one of these other machines, and I happened to go in a box, and I found another ISA card. Works perfectly. So I then had that system booting, was booting it from the DOS 3.3, and I've got a hard drive in there and it's formatted for that. I may put this PC DOS and Windows 3.1.1 on it, but that's not my ultimate goal. Even though we keep talking about DOS, what I want to save that machine for is OS2. And the reason being is you can't run OS2 on Pentium series chips. It'll run on a 386, it'll run on a 486, and if you have one of those, there's a special AMD as fast as a Pentium chip, but it's technically not chips, and I forget what the name of that is. They're very popular on eBay, and they usually go for a premium, and they're socket compatible with 486, but they give you a lot. They can be clocked a lot higher. Most 486s went up to 33 megahertz. You might have seen a 50. I think you can get that AMD chip at 100 megahertz. So, but I want to save that for OS2 since OS2 cannot be installed on either of these machines because they don't have the microcode to deal with the Pentium chip, and obviously it can't run on an 8086. One of the other machines I'd also like to put AT&T System 5 Unix 386 or SCO Unix, and I do have, believe it, a box of like 23.5-inch floppy drives for the SCO. So that would be interesting to get running on one of these. Again, that could go on the big tower, maybe dual boot it with OS2, or put it on one of the other Pentiums. So those are the projects I have lined up and the work I've done on the machines so far. I thought now I'd just talk about some of the tools and utilities that I've been using to get this work done. Okay, one of the first things you should have on hand when you're starting to restore machines like this is a package of coin batteries, because almost assuredly the batteries in all of these systems will be dead, and you can usually tell that right away when it tells you it's lost the date and time and CMOS has been reset, etc. So I happen to keep those around. But one problem you'll run into on a really old machine, and I have it on that tower, and that 46 motherboard, they don't have coin batteries. They have 3 pins in a 4-pin socket. One of them's missing, straight line. And so you can buy the battery holders or what have you. What I have done is you can buy a pack. In fact, this says 8 pieces, and I think there's some more of them. Here's one. And it comes with single, double, triple, etc. Battery holders for AA batteries. And you simply put the right connector on the end of it. And you can also source the various kinds of connectors in single roll, double roll, and you can see here's female and male pins, and you can make your own connector on the end of it and then just mount this inside the machine. The biggest thing I need to check is what the voltage is on there. I believe it's tolerable from 3.5 volts to 6 volts. So if I put three batteries, that'll give me 4.5 volts, and that should be fine. That's something I have to do immediately the next time I touch that machine. The reason being is without the battery, every time you unplug it from the wall, it loses all the CMOS settings. And I forgot about that at the time. And one of the problems on this particular machine, or the challenge I had to overcome, is since it was a 46 motherboard, it had no integrated floppy controller, hard drive controller, etc. I found one very inexpensively on eBay. I think it was like $20 for an IDE plus floppy controller, and that's what's in the machine now. It being an old machine, I keep saying 46, it's actually a 386. It has a BIOS, and you define hard drive types in the BIOS, as opposed to today, the controller just figures out how to work with it. In order for it to boot, and what you have to do is calculate if you have a drive that's not a non-standard drive, and all the drives that it knows in the BIOS are going to be MFM drives. You basically have to cheat and calculate cylinders, heads, sectors, etc., for the size of IDE drive that you put into it, and that's what I did in that case. And there's a special. It's not drive type 22, 37, etc. There, I think it's 47 is the user-defined type where you can plug in the numbers. Without the CMOS battery, it's lost that. So I have to go back and find those calculations. But that's one of the challenges. I always have the batteries on hand. Also, the kit I just showed you, I should mention, there's different of these connectors. I think it's called a Westinghouse connector. And there are crimper tools for crimping the pins. And in addition to those connector types, I bought another connector type, and I don't remember what this one's called, but this has both the part you would mount on the motherboard or on a device and the connector that goes on the cable. This is typically what you see on a sound card or a DVD drive to connect the audio cable between them, and they're used on a couple other things. So I just bought them in case I wanted connectors to go with the. I've got two sets of the Westinghouse, and in fact, there's all my other battery holders. So it's always good to have a little supply like this online. I'll go find these. I believe every one of these I got on Amazon. I'll find the links to those, and we'll put it up in the tools we use section this week. The next thing I just wanted to mention, I talked about hard drives, and like I said, the BIOS is that machine's not going to take a 100 gig hard drive, or even if it did, it's not going to be able to address it. So having smaller drives on hand can be helpful. But when you're working with IDE drive, if you can find one of these, and they're available on Amazon, but they're becoming more rare, is the IDE type that plugs into the drive and plugs into a USB port. And they usually come, when we buy one, with one of these power supplies that plugs into a hard drive. I actually find this power supply really handy because there are other tools or drives you might be working on or doing something locally, and you just want to plug it in and not have to get inside a machine. So I found this power, and in fact, this power adapter really great. And I even have times put one of those splitters. It allows me to hook two hard drives to it at the same time, and usually it can handle the power load doing that. So, speaking of working with drives, I talked about making floppies. None of the machines today tend to come with any 3.5-inch floppies. If you can find a 3.5-inch USB, hold on to it. I actually have a couple of them. And interestingly, as I'm talking about floppies, I got real lucky. My partner in this, Greg, he had a box of 10 boxes of 3.5-inch floppies. Something I'm learning over and over again is when something doesn't work, don't assume you know why it is. And what I mean by that is, case in point, I had two of these 3.5-inch floppies. I plugged them into my machine, new box of floppies, put it in there, and did format. And my Windows system kept giving me errors over and over again. I tried 2 or 3 different floppies from the box. I was getting the same result. As I said, I tried 2 different floppy drives. I was getting the same result. So I thought, my USB floppy drives were bad. Just for fun, I went and got another box of discs out, just when I was about to give up, that was sealed. And the ones I were using were in a box that I had opened 6 months ago, 8 months ago. Opened up the new box, it formatted 10 floppies, no problem, in both the USB floppy drives. So that's what I mean by don't assume you know what the problem is, because it may not be what you think. And in fact, I had that same problem on this machine with the DVD drive. This was in it, and in fact, it's got a label that says "good" from 2014. That was the last time I had tested it. Um, I had used this drive to install Windows 98 on the machine, and it worked fine. I changed the hard drive to put a bigger hard drive, put that 8 gigabyte hard drive in that I was talking about, and went to reinstall a Windows 98, and I could not get it to boot from the disk. And I thought I was going into BIOS. Did I do something wrong? It was recognizing the hard drive and everything. It just wouldn't work. And again, I had to go hunt down an IDE CD DVD ROM. Just pulled the cables, plugged it in, and booted the disk fine. So apparently, in the same day when this was working fine, it then wasn't working fine. And I was assuming it was something else because obviously this drive was working less than 2 hours before. That also brings up a great point. If you get unicorns like an IDE drive, keep one or two on hand. And in fact, I think I had used up all the ones I had in machines. And I believe 6 months ago, I did some purging and I got rid of duplicates. I shouldn't have gotten rid of so many of these duplicates. Luckily, I had an external USB drive, one of those big old USB 2.0 drive enclosures. That internally, it's an IDE drive. I pulled the drive from that. Just to finish up on floppies, something I'm planning to do on one of these machines is put a Gotek floppy emulator, which would allow me to easily move software around. And in fact, I talked earlier about those Corvus disk images. I may have to use the Gotek to read them, because when I try to use there's something called floppy emulator software. As somebody who has a Gotek-like disk emulator, also gives you tools for working with images, and it won't touch those particular images for some reason. They're IMDs, not IMGs, and I've had some IMDs I can convert, but this particular set doesn't seem to work, so my last chance is going to be see if the Gotek will read those. The one place I would have loved to have put something like this would be the original IBM PC. The problem is the controller in there can only handle, I believe, a 360 5.25 inch drive and a 720K 3.5 inch drive. So you can't put 1.2s and you can't put 1.44 size disk drives in there. And so even with the emulator can't emulate anything the controller won't be able to handle. Now, these other machines would make perfect sense. And in fact, this machine right here has no floppy drive installed at all. So that's a great candidate for that particular emulator. Speaking of emulators, I have a couple of these I mentioned. There was one in this machine, and in fact, it was the one I was trying to install DOS onto. And you'll see that this was the card that was in there, and I went and got a different card. I could boot DOS from the floppy. I could partition the hard drive. I could format it. I could install DOS on it, but it would never boot off of either one of these. I don't know if that's this. I don't think so, because I've used these in other machines, or something particular about the BIOS in here. It just hangs. It does not want to boot off of those. I'm going to try putting them in one of the other machines just to see if it is something unique to this system. In fact, the machine I'd really like to put this into and mount it is this tall one here, because then I could have OS2 on a CF card, Unix, SCO, Unix, etc., and switch between operating systems on my 386 PC. And if you're going to use CF cards, obviously a CF card reader is really great to have. So where am I going to go next? I have the DOS utilities loaded up on this machine. I'm going to start making the disk images for the Corvus. I want to see if I can read them. Then I'm going to install the software that makes this machine behave like a Corvus OmniNet and see if I can integrate it into my Apple II OmniNet network. It uses the same cabling connector system, so that won't be a problem. And also, I'm going to see if I can get on one of these two machines that AppleTalk card working and interconnected to the AppleTalk network, possibly to share printers, but just share files. There are ways of moving files between these machines, and in fact, one of the things I have kept hold of anytime I see it, and this machine has one, are 3COM ISA Ethernet cards. I think they're only 10 megabit. The reason I hold on to those is you can find the drivers for 3COM cards. If you have some knockoff driver, back in the bad days of these ISA machines, ISA bus machines, you needed a car. You had to have separate drivers. They always came with the cards, and something that old, if it was from a no-name brand, you might not be able to find the drivers today. In addition, many of the software like OS2 or Windows 98 probably would recognize the 3COM card. They'd have the drivers for it. Windows 95 would have the drivers for it. But for off brands or even Netgear or D-Link or something, if you had a card from them back in those days, you'd have to go find the drivers. They may not have come in the Windows installation media or the OS2 installation media. So that's why I try to keep hold of the very main brands for accessories. Same thing with, I have some USB cards and FireWire cards. I tend to prefer Belkin because they were more likely supported, or you can find the drivers for the operating system to add them to your machine. So my next video is probably going to be on one of those two network projects and using this machine, or possibly taking a leap and getting OS2 running on our 386. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. If you haven't already, subscribe. And I would love to hear comments or feedbacks or questions or suggestions on what I should be doing with these particular machines.